Kaitlan Collins just made a career-ending mistake on CNN that nobody saw coming. What happened in the next 30 seconds left Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett completely stunned, and may have just destroyed Collins's reputation forever. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video so you don't miss any of the latest political drama that's shaking up America. Trust me, you're going to want to see every second of what went down. The CNN studio lights blazed as Kaitlan Collins sat behind her anchor desk, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a sharp navy blazer that screamed authority. It was supposed to be a routine Tuesday night interview on The Source with Kaitlan Collins. The 31-year-old host had built her career on tough questions and fearless journalism, climbing from White House correspondent to primetime anchor in just a few years. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old Democrat from Texas who had been making waves in Congress with her fierce advocacy and sharp legal mind. Crockett wore a burgundy blazer, her natural hair styled elegantly, exuding the confidence of someone who had fought battles in courtrooms long before stepping into the political arena. The topic was supposed to be straightforward, discussing the latest developments in congressional investigations, but Collins had other plans. Her research team had dug up what they thought was damaging information about Crockett's qualifications, and Collins was ready to pounce. "Congresswoman Crockett," Collins began, her voice carrying that familiar edge that had made her famous, "I have to ask you directly about something that's been bothering a lot of people. You've been very vocal about complex legal matters in Congress, but looking at your background, don't you think you're somewhat unqualified to be making these kinds of statements?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Collins had just thrown down a gauntlet that would change everything. Crockett's eyes narrowed slightly, but her composure remained intact. She leaned forward just a fraction, her lawyer instincts kicking in immediately. This wasn't just an interview question, this was an attack, and she recognized it instantly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Crockett asked, her voice steady but with an undertone that suggested Collins had just stepped into dangerous territory. Collins, emboldened by what she perceived as uncertainty, doubled down. "I said, given your limited experience in law and politics, don't you think calling yourself qualified to speak on these matters is—" What Collins didn't know was that she had just challenged someone who had spent years dismantling opponents in Texas courtrooms, someone who had earned her law degree, built a successful practice, and then decided to take her fight for justice to the halls of Congress. Someone who had faced down hostile judges, aggressive prosecutors, and intimidating opposing counsel without flinching. Someone who was about to remind America exactly who Jasmine Crockett really was. Behind the scenes, CNN producers were already sensing something different about this interview. The usual dynamic of host controlling guest was shifting in real time. Camera operators noticed Crockett's body language. She wasn't defensive or nervous like many politicians caught off guard. Instead, she had the calm, calculated demeanor of someone who had been in tougher situations and emerged victorious. Collins, meanwhile, was riding high on what she perceived as a successful opening attack. She had no idea that her carefully planned ambush was about to become her professional nightmare, broadcast live to millions of viewers who would witness one of the most spectacular interview failures in television history. The Congresswoman's response would not only shock Collins, but send shockwaves through the entire political world, turning what was supposed to be a routine interview into a masterclass in how to handle media ambush tactics. To understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold, you need to know exactly who these two women are and why this confrontation mattered so much to millions of Americans watching. Kaitlan Collins had always been the golden child of CNN. At just 31, she had risen through the ranks faster than almost anyone in television news. Born in Alabama, she had worked her way up from the Daily Caller to the White House press corps, where she made a name for herself by asking tough questions during the Trump administration. Her blonde hair, sharp suits, and even sharper questions had made her a household name. Collins had earned her reputation through some genuinely impressive moments. She had pressed White House press secretaries on inconsistencies, challenged politicians from both parties, and wasn't afraid to ask the questions others wouldn't. Her move from print journalism to television had been meteoric, and CNN executives saw her as the future of the network, young, fearless, and unafraid of confrontation. But Collins had developed a reputation that preceded her. She was known for ambush journalism, for catching politicians off guard with questions designed more for viral moments than actual journalism. Her interview style had become increasingly aggressive over the past year, with critics noting that she seemed more interested in creating gotcha moments than in substantive policy discussion. Some media analysts had started calling her style gotcha journalism, but CNN loved the ratings she brought in and the social media engagement her confrontational approach generated. Her confidence had been building for months. She had successfully grilled several Republican politicians, earning praise from liberal viewers and media critics. She thought she had found the perfect target in Jasmine Crockett, a relatively new Congresswoman who Collins assumed would be easy to rat. Collins had done what she thought was thorough research. She knew Crockett had been elected to Congress in 2022 representing Texas' 30th Congressional District. She knew Crockett was a lawyer, but what Collins didn't fully understand was the depth of Crockett's background and the fire she was about to ignite. Jasmine Crockett was not just any lawyer. She had earned her law degree from the University of Houston Law Center, one of the most respected legal institutions in Texas. But more importantly, she had spent years in the trenches of the legal system, fighting for civil rights, defending the accused, and taking on cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. Before Congress, Crockett had built a reputation as a fierce advocate in Texas state politics. She had served in the Texas House of Representatives, where she quickly became known for her sharp questioning and her ability to dismantle opponents with facts and logic. She had authored legislation on criminal justice reform, voting rights, and economic development. But Crockett's real strength came from her background as a trial lawyer. She had spent countless hours in courtrooms, facing down prosecutors, judges, and opposing counsel. She knew how to think on her feet, how to turn an attack into an opportunity, and how to use an opponent's overconfidence against them. The stakes of this confrontation went far beyond a simple TV interview. This was about respect, about the way successful black women in politics are often questioned and undermined. This was about the difference between real journalism and performative gotcha moments. And this was about what happens when someone makes the mistake of underestimating Jasmine Crockett. Collins sat there thinking she had the upper hand. She had the platform, the prime-time audience, and what she believed was damaging information. She thought she was about to score another viral moment that would cement her reputation as a fearless journalist. Crockett, meanwhile, recognized exactly what was happening. She had faced this kind of challenge before, in courtrooms, in the Texas legislature, and in her legal practice. She knew she was being set up, but she also knew she had the tools to turn this ambush into Collins's worst nightmare. The CNN audience was about to witness something extraordinary. They were about to see what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when experience confronts arrogance, and when someone who has spent their career fighting for justice gets attacked on live television. Collins had just picked a fight with the wrong person, and America was about to find out exactly who Jasmine Crockett really was. Collins leaned back in her chair, a slight smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She thought she had Crockett right where she wanted her. The CNN host had prepared what she believed were devastating talking points, and she was ready to deploy them one by one. "Let me be more specific, Congresswoman," Collins continued, her voice taking on that tone that had become her signature, part prosecutor, part television personality. "You've been very vocal about constitutional law, criminal justice reform, and complex legislative matters. But when I look at your resume, I see someone who only served 2 terms in the Texas state legislature before jumping to Congress. Don't you think the American people deserve representatives with more substantial experience?" The studio crew exchanged glances. This was getting uncomfortable, even for CNN standards. But Collins pressed on, emboldened by what she interpreted as Crockett's silence. Crockett sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. But those who knew her recognized the signs. Her jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. Her eyes had taken on a laser focus that trial lawyers develop after years of combat. She was not rattled. She was calculated. Furthermore, Collins continued, clearly enjoying what she thought was her moment of triumph. "You've made some pretty bold statements about legal precedent and constitutional interpretation. I've spoken to several legal experts who question whether someone with your background should be making such authoritative claims about complex legal matters." Collins paused dramatically, clearly expecting some kind of defensive response. Instead, Crockett simply nodded slowly, as if she was processing not just the words, but the entire strategy behind them. "Are you finished?" Crockett asked quietly, her voice carrying an ominous calm that anyone who had faced her in a courtroom would have recognized immediately. Collins blinked, momentarily thrown off by the question. "I'm sorry? I asked if you were finished with your questions," Crockett repeated, her tone still measured but with an edge that was becoming more apparent. "Because I want to make sure I address all of your concerns comprehensively." Collins nodded, sensing that something had shifted but not quite understanding what. "Yes. I think those are the main points." "Good," Crockett said, and then something changed in her demeanor entirely. The quiet, patient Congresswoman was gone, replaced by the trial lawyer who had spent years demolishing unprepared opponents. "Ms. Collins, before I respond to your interesting characterization of my qualifications, I want to make sure I understand what we're doing here. You invited me on your show ostensibly to discuss congressional investigations and current policy matters, but instead you've chosen to spend the first several minutes of this interview questioning my basic qualifications to hold the office that the voters of Texas' 30th District elected me to fill. Is that correct?" Collins shifted uncomfortably. The interview was not going the way she had planned. "Well, I think it's fair to ask about—" "I'm not finished," Crockett interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You mentioned that you've spoken to legal experts who question my background. I'm curious, did you share with these experts that I graduated from the University of Houston Law Center? Did you mention that I've been a practicing attorney for over 15 years? Did you tell them about my work in civil rights law, criminal defense, and civil litigation?" Collins opened her mouth to respond, but Crockett was just getting started. "Did you inform these mysterious legal experts that before I came to Congress, I served in the Texas House of Representatives, where I authored over a dozen pieces of legislation that became law? Did you mention that I sit on the Judiciary Committee here in Congress? You know, the committee that actually deals with those complex legal matters you seem so concerned about." The studio had become completely silent except for Crockett's voice, which was growing stronger and more commanding with each word. "Or did you conveniently leave out the fact that I've actually argued cases in court, that I've represented clients in complex litigation, that I've spent years studying and practicing the very legal principles you think I'm unqualified to discuss?" Collins tried to jump in. "Congresswoman, I think you're mischaracterizing." "No, Miss Collins, I think you're the one who's been mischaracterizing. Let me ask you something. What's your legal background? Where did you go to law school? How many cases have you tried? How many pieces of legislation have you authored?" Collins' face was beginning to flush. "I'm a journalist, I don't need to." "Exactly," Crockett said, leaning forward now, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was completely in control. "You're a journalist. And yet, here you are questioning the qualifications of someone who has actually studied law, practiced law, and written law. Don't you find that a little, what's the word you used, questionable?" The irony was not lost on anyone in the studio or watching at home. Collins, who had started the interview trying to expose Crockett as unqualified, was now being systematically dismantled by someone who was demonstrating exactly why she was supremely qualified. But Crockett wasn't done. She had spent too many years being underestimated, too many courtrooms being dismissed, too many situations where people looked at her and assumed she didn't belong. This was her moment to set the record straight, not just for herself, but for every qualified woman who had ever been questioned simply because someone else thought they knew better. "Ms. Collins, I want to address something else you said. You mentioned that I've only served 2 terms in the Texas legislature before jumping to Congress. Let me educate you about something. Texas state legislators serve 2-year terms. So when you say only 2 terms, you're talking about 4 years of state-level legislative experience, plus my 15-plus years as a practicing attorney, plus my extensive background in civil rights advocacy." Collins was now visibly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat and looking at her notes, as if they might provide some escape from the systematic demolition of her argument. "But here's what really bothers me about your line of questioning," Crockett continued, her voice taking on a tone that anyone who had watched her in committee hearings would recognize. This was the voice she used when she was about to make a point that would be remembered for years. "You seem to think that experience only counts if it fits into some narrow definition that you've decided upon. You dismiss state legislative experience, you ignore legal practice, you overlook advocacy work. It seems like the only qualifications you're willing to recognize are the ones that fit your preconceived notions." The Congresswoman paused, letting that sink in before delivering what everyone would later recognize as the turning point of the entire confrontation. So let me ask you directly, Miss Collins, what exactly would qualify someone in your expert opinion to serve in Congress? And more importantly, who appointed you the arbiter of those qualifications? The moment that followed Crockett's question was electric. Collins sat there, her carefully prepared attack completely neutralized, facing a question that exposed the fundamental flaw in her entire approach. The hunter had become the hunted, and everyone watching could feel the shift. Collins stammered for a moment, looking down at her notes as if they might contain some magic response that could save her from the hole she had dug herself into. The American people deserve accurate journalism, Crockett cut her off, her voice now carrying the full authority of someone who had spent years in courtrooms, facing down opponents who thought they were smarter than her. And what you've done here tonight is the opposite of that. Crockett reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Collins' eyes widened. She clearly hadn't expected the Congresswoman to come prepared with her own materials. Since you want to discuss qualifications, let's discuss them properly, Crockett said, opening the folder. Let's start with education. I graduated from Rhodes College with honors, then earned my Juris Doctor from the University of Houston Law Center. Miss Collins, where did you study journalism? Collins looked like she wanted to disappear. I studied journalism and political science at the University of Alabama. Good school, Crockett acknowledged with a nod that somehow managed to be both gracious and devastating. Now let's talk about experience. After law school, I worked as a public defender, representing clients who couldn't afford private attorneys. I handled everything from misdemeanors to felonies, from drug cases to domestic violence cases. I've stood in front of juries and argued for people's freedom. I've cross-examined witnesses, challenged evidence, and studied every aspect of our criminal justice system from the inside. She pulled out a document from her folder. Then I moved into civil rights law. I've represented clients in discrimination cases, voting rights cases, and civil liberties matters. I've argued in state and federal courts. I've written briefs, conducted depositions, and negotiated settlements in complex litigation. Collins was now clearly struggling to maintain her composure. The interview she thought she was controlling had become a masterclass in preparation and expertise. After building my legal practice, I decided to run for the Texas House of Representatives because I wanted to change the system from the inside, Crockett continued. During my time in the Texas legislature, I authored and passed legislation on criminal justice reform, voting rights, economic development, and education funding. She pulled out another document. This is House Bill of 186, which I authored to reform bail practices in Texas. This is House Bill 2754, which expanded access to expungement for certain nonviolent offenses. This is House Bill 1888, which addressed discriminatory practices in hair and appearance policies. Each document she produced was like another nail in the coffin of Collins' credibility. Now, Collins, since you seem so concerned about qualifications, let me ask you about yours. How many laws have you written? How many clients have you represented? How many courtrooms have you argued in? How many times have you had to defend someone's constitutional right? Collins opened her mouth, but no words came out. The question hung in the air like a challenge that everyone knew she couldn't meet. I'll answer for you, Crockett said, her voice now carrying a tone of someone who was delivering a final verdict. None. Zero. You've never written a law, never represented a client, never argued in court, never had to defend anyone's rights. And yet you have the audacity to sit here and question my qualifications. The studio was dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen in place. But Crockett wasn't finished. She was about to deliver the moment that would be replayed millions of times across social media, the moment that would define this confrontation forever. Miss Collins, I want to address something else. You said you spoke to legal experts who questioned my background. I'm curious. Can you name these experts? Can you tell us their credentials? Can you share their specific concerns? Collins looked panicked. Well, I can't reveal my sources. Of course you can't. Crockett interrupted, her voice dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for perjurious witnesses. Because they don't exist, do they? This wasn't journalism. This was a hit job. You came into this interview with a predetermined narrative, and you tried to ambush me with questions designed to make me look incompetent. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Collins with laser intensity. But you made one critical mistake, Ms. Collins. You underestimated me. You looked at me and saw what you wanted to see, a young black woman from Texas who you thought would be easy to intimidate. You didn't do your homework. You didn't understand who you were dealing with. And now you're facing the consequences of your own incompetence. The words hit like hammer blows. Collins' face had gone from flushed to pale, and she was clearly struggling to find any way to salvage the situation. Here's what real qualifications look like, Crockett said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone delivering a closing argument. 15 years of legal practice. 4 years in state legislature. Multiple pieces of successful legislation. Service on the House Judiciary Committee. A track record of fighting for civil rights, criminal justice reform, and economic opportunity. She paused, letting each credential sink in. But you know what the most important qualification is. The trust of the voters. The people of Texas's 30th District looked at my record, my experience, and my vision for the future, and they chose me to represent them. They didn't need your permission, and neither do I. Collins tried one last desperate gambit. Congresswoman, I think you're being overly defensive. Defensive? Crockett's voice rose for the first time, and the power in it was unmistakable. Ms. Collins, I'm not being defensive. I'm being accurate. There's a difference, though I understand why you might not recognize it. The Congresswoman stood up, gathering her materials with the deliberate calm of someone who had just completed a masterful performance. I came here tonight to discuss policy, to talk about the important work we're doing in Congress for the American people. Instead, you chose to waste everyone's time with a poorly researched attack on my qualification. You've embarrassed yourself, you've embarrassed your network, and you've demonstrated exactly why so many Americans have lost trust in mainstream media. She looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home. To the viewers watching tonight, you deserve better than this. You deserve journalists who do their homework, who ask substantive questions about policy and governance, who treat elected officials with the respect that the democratic process demands. What you witnessed here tonight is the opposite of journalism. It's entertainment masquerading as news, and it's beneath the standards that we should expect from our media. Collins sat there, stunned into silence, as Crockett delivered her final blow. Collins, next time you want to question someone's qualifications, I suggest you start by examining your own. Good evening. And with that, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked off the CNN set, leaving behind a host who had been completely and utterly demolished, and an audience that had just witnessed one of the most devastating takedowns in television history. Within minutes of Crockett walking off the CNN set, social media exploded like a digital atomic bomb. The footage of her systematic destruction of Kaitlan Collins spread across every platform faster than anyone could have imagined. The hashtag John Crockett Destroys Collins started trending on Twitter within the first hour, accompanied by Qualified Queen and Lawyer Up. The clips were everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, each platform amplifying the moment in its own way. A prominent civil rights attorney tweeted, "I've watched Jasmine Crockett in action for years. This is exactly who she's always been. Brilliant, prepared, and unshakable. Collins picked the wrong fight with the wrong woman." The tweet got over 50,000 likes in the first 2 hours. Conservative commentator Charlie Kirk, not typically aligned with Crockett politically, posted, "Politics aside, that was a masterclass in preparation defeating ambush journalism. Collins got schooled." Even that got thousands of retweets from people across the political spectrum, who recognized excellent debate skills when they saw them. But the real explosion came from everyday Americans, who saw something in Crockett's response that resonated deeply. A viral TikTok video from a young black woman lawyer got over 2 million views. This is what it looks like when someone tries to underestimate a black woman who's done the work. Jasmine Crockett just became my hero. The response wasn't limited to social media. Cable news networks across the spectrum were forced to cover the story. Fox News, typically critical of Democratic politicians, found themselves in the unusual position of acknowledging Crockett's performance. Tucker Carlson, in a rare moment of bipartisan recognition, said on his show, "Politics aside, that was a clinic in how to handle an unprepared interviewer." Collins walked into a buzzsaw of her own making. Even late-night comedy shows got in on the action. Stephen Colbert dedicated an entire segment to the confrontation, complete with dramatic reenactments. "Kaitlan Collins learned something important last night," Colbert quipped. If you're going to come for someone's credentials, maybe check your own first. It's like challenging LeBron James to a game of basketball when you can barely dribble. Saturday Night Live announced they would be featuring the confrontation in their cold open, with cast members already rehearsing their impressions of both Collins and Crockett. The sketch, when it aired, became one of the most watched SNL segments of the year. International media picked up the story as well. The BBC ran a piece analyzing American political journalism, using the Collins-Crockett confrontation as an example of what they called performance journalism, overtaking substantive reporting. Le Monde in France published an editorial questioning whether American television news had become too focused on creating viral moments rather than informing the public. The memes came fast and furious. One showed Collins at the beginning of the interview labeled confidence, and at the end labeled regret. Another featured Crockett with the caption, "When you come for the Queen you better not miss," and Collins missed by miles. Legal Twitter went absolutely wild. Law professors, practicing attorneys, and legal analysts all weighed in on Crockett's performance. A Harvard law professor tweeted, "Perfect example of why you never challenge someone's credentials without doing your homework first." Crockett's response was textbook advocacy. She controlled the narrative, presented evidence, and delivered a closing argument that was devastating. Meanwhile, CNN was facing a crisis. The network's phones were ringing off the hook with complaints about Collins' ambush tactic. Media critics who had been watching Collins' rise were suddenly questioning whether her aggressive style had gone too far. A media analysis piece published that night by the Columbia Journalism Review was particularly brutal. Collins' attack on Crockett represents everything wrong with modern television journalism: the pursuit of viral moments over substantive reporting, the privileging of drama over information, and the dangerous assumption that preparation can be replaced by aggression. But Collins wasn't going down without a fight. Late that night she posted on social media, "I ask tough questions. That's my job. If politicians can't handle scrutiny, maybe they shouldn't be in politics." The response was immediate and merciless. Thousands of replies pointed out the difference between tough questions and unprepared attacks. One particularly viral response read, "Tough questions require preparation and substance. What you did tonight was lazy journalism, disguised as toughness." Jasmine Crockett exposed that. The next morning brought even more fallout. Morning shows across all networks were discussing the confrontation. Good Morning America brought on a panel of journalists to discuss the ethics of Collins' approach. Morning Joe spent an entire segment analyzing how the interview went wrong, but perhaps the most telling response came from CNN's own legal analyst, who appeared on Anderson Cooper's show the following night. "Look, I know Kaitlan, and she's usually better prepared than, but what happened last night was inexcusable. Jasmine Crockett is exceptionally qualified, more qualified than most members of Congress, frankly. To question her credentials while being so unprepared about her actual background was journalistic malpractice." The political implications were immediate and far-reaching. Democratic leadership rallied around Crockett. Speaker Nancy Pelosi issued a statement. "Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated last night why she's such a valuable member of our caucus. Her expertise, preparation, and grace under fire are exactly what we need in Congress." But the support wasn't limited to Democrats. Several Republican colleagues, while disagreeing with her politics, acknowledged her performance. One GOP congressman told Politico, "I don't agree with Jasmine on much, but damn if she didn't handle that perfectly. Collins got what she deserved." The legal community's response was overwhelmingly supportive. The National Bar Association issued a statement praising Crockett's dignified and professional response to unprofessional journalism. The American Civil Liberties Union tweeted, "This is what it looks like when experience meets preparation." Congresswoman Crockett showed why credentials matter. Within a week, Crockett had gained over 200,000 new followers across all social media platforms. Speaking requests poured in from universities, legal organizations, and advocacy groups. A book publisher reached out about a potential memoir, but perhaps the most meaningful response came from young lawyers and law students across the country. A second-year law student at Howard University posted a video that went viral. "Watching Congresswoman Crockett last night reminded me why I went to law school. She showed us what it looks like to be prepared, professional, and powerful all at the same time." The incident also sparked broader conversations about media representation and the treatment of black women in politics. A think piece in The Atlantic explored how black women politicians are often subjected to different standards and more aggressive questioning than their white counterparts. The piece, titled The Crockett Standard, When Qualifications Aren't Enough, detailed how successful black women in politics face constant challenges to their credibility that their white counterparts rarely encounter. Angela Davis, a political science professor at Georgetown University, appeared on several news programs to discuss the broader implications. What we witnessed wasn't just bad journalism, she explained on MS. It was a perfect example of how black women's expertise is consistently questioned and undermined, even when they're more qualified than the people questioning them. The incident resonated particularly strongly with black women across America who had faced similar challenges in their own career. A viral Twitter thread from a federal judge detailed her own experiences. "I've been questioned about my qualifications more times than I can count, by lawyers, by colleagues, even by court clerks." Watching Congresswoman Crockett handle that attack with such grace and power was cathartic for every black woman who's ever had to prove she belonged in the room. Professional organizations began using the Collins-Crockett exchange as a teaching moment. The National Association of Black Journalists issued a statement calling for better preparation and more respectful interview techniques when covering elected officials. The American Bar Association's Committee on Racial and Ethnic Diversity in the Legal Profession praised Crockett's response as a masterful demonstration of how expertise and preparation can overcome bias and unprofessionalism. CNN, meanwhile, was dealing with serious internal fallout. Sources within the network told media reporters that there were heated discussions about Collins' interview style and whether fundamental changes needed to be made to prevent similar embarrassment. Some veteran CNN journalists privately expressed concerns that the network's reputation for serious journalism was being damaged by what they characterized as unprofessional ambush tactics designed more for viral moments than actual news coverage. Collins tried to control the damage with a follow-up segment a few days later, but it only made things worse. Her attempt to double down on her questioning came across as defensive and tone-deaf. Social media users quickly dubbed it Collins's second mistake. The long-term implications were still unfolding weeks later. Media critics began using the Collins-Crockett confrontation as a case study in how not to conduct interviews. Journalism schools started incorporating the incident into their ethics curricula. Columbia Journalism School announced they would be adding a new course called Preparation versus Performance: Ethical Standards in Political Interviewing, using the Collins-Crockett exchange as the central case study. The Poynter Institute, a respected journalism think tank, published a comprehensive analysis titled, "When Ambush Journalism Backfires: Lessons from the Collins-Crockett Interview." The piece became required reading at several major news organizations as they reassessed their interview standards and practices. Young journalists across the country were taking note. A journalism student at Northwestern University created a YouTube video breaking down what went wrong in Collins's approach, which garnered over 500,000 views. You research your subject, you prepare substantive questions, and you focus on serving the public interest, not creating viral moments. Professional journalism organizations began hosting panel discussions about the incident. The Society of Professional Journalists organized a virtual symposium titled Accountability versus Ambush: Finding the Right Balance, featuring prominent journalists, media critics, and political communication experts. For Crockett, the moment had transformed her from a respected but relatively unknown congresswoman into a national figure. Her committee appearances began drawing larger audiences. Her policy positions got more media coverage. She was invited to appear on major Sunday morning shows, not to defend her qualifications, but to discuss substantive policy issues. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Within weeks of the CNN confrontation, Crockett was being mentioned as a rising star in the Democratic Party. Political analysts began speculating about her future. Could she be a candidate for statewide office in Texas? Was she positioning herself for a leadership role in Congress? The woman who had been dismissed by Collins as unqualified was now being discussed as one of the most promising political talents of her generation. Her speaking fees increased dramatically. Universities that had never heard of her before were offering substantial sums for her to speak at commencement ceremonies and policy forums. A major publisher approached her about writing a book about her experiences in law and politics. Television producers reached out about potential documentary projects exploring her rise from Texas courtrooms to national prominence. The irony was perfect. Collins's attempt to diminish Crockett had instead elevated her to a much larger platform and established her as a formidable voice in American politics. But the real lesson of the Collins-Crockett confrontation went deeper than just one interview gone wrong. It was about preparation versus assumption, substance versus style, and the dangers of underestimating someone based on superficial impressions. Crockett had spent years building her credentials, honing her skills, and preparing for moments exactly like this one. When Collins tried to ambush her, she was ready, not just with facts and figures, but with the confidence that comes from knowing you've done the work. Collins, meanwhile, had relied on assumptions and stereotypes rather than thorough preparation. She had looked at Crockett and seen what she expected to see, rather than investigating who she actually was. It was a mistake that cost her credibility and became a cautionary tale for journalists everywhere. The incident also highlighted the importance of authentic expertise in an age of performative journalism. Viewers could see the difference between someone who had actually studied and practiced law and someone who was asking questions without really understanding the subject matter. Months later, when asked about the confrontation in an interview with Essence magazine, Crockett reflected, "That night wasn't about me versus Kaitlan Collins. It was about preparation versus assumption, substance versus performance. I've spent my entire career preparing for moments when someone would try to diminish my qualifications. I wasn't going to let that happen on national television." She continued, "The real lesson is for young people watching, especially young women, especially young black women. Do the work, be prepared, know your stuff, and when someone tries to tear you down, you'll have the tools to build yourself up." The Collins-Crockett confrontation became more than just a viral moment. It became a masterclass in how preparation, expertise, and composure can triumph over aggression and assumption. It reminded America that credentials matter, that experience counts, and that sometimes the person you least expect to be formidable turns out to be the most prepared person in the room. And for everyone watching, it was a reminder that in an age of sound bites and gotcha moments, substance still matters. Real qualifications still count. And sometimes, justice comes in the form of a perfectly prepared congresswoman systematically dismantling an unprepared journalist on live television. Thanks for watching this incredible political showdown unfold. If you enjoyed seeing Jasmine Crockett absolutely demolish Kaitlan Collins with facts and preparation, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more explosive political content. We'll keep bringing you the moments that define American politics, the confrontations, the victories, and the lessons that shape our democracy. Don't miss the next viral political moment that everyone will be talking about. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you're first to see the action.